On a quiet summer evening in Mumbai, a cold call shattered the calm. A mother's voice, thick with rage and panic, screamed for help. By the time police arrived, the scene inside the small apartment was drenched in horror. A teenage girl lay lifeless, her body bearing the marks of a brutal beating. At the center of it all stood her mother, hands trembling, eyes hollow. What could push a mother to kill her own daughter? As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a story of betrayal, obsession, and a love triangle so twisted it blurred the lines between victim and villain. This wasn't just a case of murder, it was a family imploding from the inside. On the evening of February 3, 2025, a frantic call came into the Mumbai police station. A woman, her voice trembling, claimed that her teenage daughter had collapsed and was unresponsive. The call was brief, her words rushed, and before the dispatcher could ask further questions, the line went dead. Officers were dispatched to the scene, a modest two-bedroom apartment in a densely populated neighborhood of Andheri. When they arrived, they found 16-year-old Anaya Sharma lying motionless on the cold tile floor of her bedroom. Her face was swollen, bruises covered her arms, and blood had pooled near the corner of the bed. There were deep wounds along her back, as if she had been struck repeatedly with something heavy. The officers called for paramedics, but one glance from them confirmed what was already clear. Anaya was gone. Her mother, 38-year-old Reena Sharma, sat on the floor nearby, rocking back and forth. She was dressed in a nightgown stained with what appeared to be her daughter's blood. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between shock and exhaustion. Standing in the doorway was her husband, Rajiv, Anaya's stepfather, his hands gripping the frame so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Neighbors had gathered in the hallway, whispering among themselves. One of them, an elderly woman, approached an officer hesitantly and mentioned that loud screams had been heard from the apartment hours earlier. It wasn't the first time, she added. The couple had frequent arguments, but tonight had sounded different, more violent. As officers secured the crime scene, they started piecing together the events of the past few hours. There were signs of a struggle in Anaya's room. Scattered papers, broken glass, and the unmistakable streaks of blood smeared across the floor. The mother's right hand was swollen, her knuckles split open. In the corner of the room, partially hidden under the bed, was a thick wooden rod, the kind used for beating rugs. It was stained dark red. The officers took Reena into custody immediately, suspecting that she was responsible. She didn't resist. She simply stared straight ahead, as if she had already accepted her fate. Rajiv, however, remained frozen in place, barely able to form words when questioned. He kept insisting that it had been a mistake, that no one had meant for things to go this far. But what had led to this? What could push a mother to such an unthinkable act? As investigators dug deeper, a disturbing truth emerged, one that shattered the illusion of a normal family and exposed a twisted reality hiding beneath it. Reena had married Rajiv Sharma 5 years earlier, after a brief and passionate courtship. He was younger than her by 7 years, handsome, well-spoken, and charming. She had been a widow at the time, struggling to raise Anaya on her own, and Rajiv had been a breath of fresh air. He was affectionate, supportive, and seemed genuinely interested in helping raise her daughter. The early years of their marriage had been happy, but over time, small cracks began to show. Rajiv's behavior had changed. He stayed out late, took secret phone calls, and had grown distant. Reena, once confident in their relationship, found herself becoming increasingly insecure. She accused him of cheating, questioned his every move, and started checking his phone when he wasn't looking. Their arguments became more frequent and more intense. Then something happened that turned her suspicions into a horrifying reality. A week before Anaya's death, Reena had noticed a shift in the way Rajiv interacted with her daughter. He had always been affectionate toward Anaya, but suddenly there was something different. He lingered in her room longer than necessary. He complimented her in ways that felt inappropriate. One evening, Reena had walked in on the two of them sitting too closely together on the couch. Anaya had looked uncomfortable, but Rajiv had simply smiled, as if nothing was wrong. Reena's worst fears were confirmed when she checked her husband's phone the following day. Hidden among his messages was a conversation with an unknown number, messages that were undeniably from Anaya. They were short, filled with hesitation, as if she had been coerced into responding. But the meaning was clear. Rina's world shattered. Her husband had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way, and worse, it was her own daughter who had been dragged into it. From that moment on, rage consumed her. She watched their every move, analyzing every interaction. Her paranoia grew, and with it her resentment toward Anaya. In her mind, her daughter had become the enemy, someone who had stolen her husband's love and humiliated her. On the night of the murder, something inside her snapped. It had started as a confrontation. She had waited for Rajiv to leave for work before storming into Anaya's room. What had begun as an argument quickly turned violent. Blinded by fury, she had grabbed the nearest object and lashed out. The first strike had sent Anaya crashing to the floor. The next few had been a blur of raw, uncontrollable rage. By the time she stopped, Anaya was barely breathing. Realizing what she had done, Rina had panicked. She had tried to wake Anaya, shaking her, calling her name, but there had been no response. Minutes had passed before she finally reached for her phone to call for help. Now, as she sat in the cold grey walls of the interrogation room, she refused to speak. The officers pressed her for details, but she remained silent. Her body was present, but her mind was elsewhere. Perhaps trapped in the moment when her daughter took her last breath. The case sent shockwaves throughout Mumbai. The media latched onto the story, painting Rina as a jealous, unstable woman who had murdered her own child out of envy. Some people, however, speculated that there was more to the story. Had Anaya truly been a willing participant, or had she been a victim herself? And what about Rajiv? What role had he played in all of this? As the investigation continued, authorities turned their attention to him. If he had truly been involved with Anaya, he could be charged with statutory rape under Indian law. But proving it wasn't easy. He denied any wrongdoing, claiming that Rina had imagined everything. He painted himself as a devoted husband who had tried to keep his family together, only to watch it fall apart. But the truth, whatever it was, had already claimed a life. Anaya was gone, her body now lying in the city morgue, awaiting an autopsy that would confirm the brutal nature of her final moments. Rina was behind bars, facing a murder charge that could lead to life imprisonment or even the death penalty. And Rajiv, though free for now, was under intense scrutiny. The police had one goal: to uncover every piece of this tragic puzzle. But even as they worked tirelessly to piece together the final moments of Anaya Sharma's life, one question loomed over the entire case. As investigators dug deeper into the case, they began reconstructing the days leading up to Anaya Sharma's death. Witness testimonies, forensic evidence, and digital records painted a disturbing picture of a family torn apart by betrayal, obsession, and violence. Forensic reports revealed that Anaya had suffered multiple blows to her body, with severe trauma to her head and ribs. The cause of death was internal bleeding, most likely from repeated strikes with a heavy object. The wooden rod found in her room was sent for testing, and the blood on it was confirmed to be hers. Additionally, bruises on Anaya's wrists suggested she had tried to defend herself. This wasn't just a moment of blind rage. Rina had beaten her daughter until she could no longer fight back. As the autopsy results came in, detectives focused on Rajiv Sharma. He was a central figure in the case, yet his involvement remained unclear. When questioned, he maintained that he had no inappropriate relationship with Anaya. He insisted that Rina was a jealous, possessive woman who had always been insecure about their marriage. He admitted that she had accused him of cheating in the past, but denied any wrongdoing. However, Rajiv's phone records told a different story. Police found hundreds of messages exchanged between him and Anaya over several months. Many of them were casual, discussing school and family matters, but others were concerned. Some were late-night messages from Rajiv asking Anaya if she was awake. Others were filled with cryptic phrases, hints of secret meetings, and one message stood out. Just 3 days before her murder, Anaya had texted Rajiv, "I don't think we should talk like this anymore. It feels wrong. Please stop." Rajiv had replied within minutes, "You know how I feel about you. Don't say things like that." That single exchange shifted the case's direction. While it wasn't explicit proof of a physical relationship, it suggested emotional manipulation. investigators believed Rajiv had been grooming Anaya, slowly breaking down the boundaries between them. Whether she had willingly engaged or had been coerced remained unclear, but the texts indicated that she had started to pull away. This revelation led to another theory. Had Anaya's murder been a reaction to her rejection of both Rajiv and her mother's increasing suspicions? Neighbors provided more details that painted a grim picture of the household. The elderly woman who had reported the screaming the night of the murder recalled seeing Reena acting strangely in the days prior. She had been agitated, pacing in the apartment's small balcony, muttering to herself. Another neighbor, a young woman who lived next door, mentioned overhearing Reena and Anaya arguing frequently. She had once heard Reena say, "You've ruined everything," followed by the sound of something shattering. There was also a key witness, Anaya's best friend, Priya. She revealed to detectives that Anaya had confided in her just a week before her death. According to Priya, Anaya had been acting withdrawn, avoiding conversations about her home life. When pressed, Anaya had admitted that she felt trapped. "My mum hates me now. She looks at me like I'm disgusting. I don't know what I did wrong," she had told Priya. Investigators pieced together the timeline of the fatal night. Rajiv had left for work around 7 p.m. He worked at a shipping company and was scheduled for a night shift. Surveillance footage confirmed he had clocked in at his office. This meant he was not present during the murder. At 9:30 p.m., neighbors reported hearing shouting from the Sharma household. The argument lasted nearly 20 minutes, during which multiple loud thuds were heard. No one intervened, assuming it was another family dispute. By 10:15 p.m., the apartment fell silent. Reena's phone activity showed that she had attempted to call Rajiv twice, both times unanswered. At 10:40 p.m., she called an ambulance but hung up before speaking. When Rajiv returned home at 2 a.m., he found Anaya's lifeless body on the floor and his wife sitting next to it. He later told police that she had looked at him blankly and said, "It's over." Despite Rajiv's insistence that he had no inappropriate relationship with Anaya, detectives continued to scrutinize him. They searched his laptop, hoping to uncover more evidence. What they found only deepened their suspicions. Hidden in a private folder were dozens of photos of Anaya. Some taken in the house, others clearly taken without her knowledge. Some were innocent, pictures of family outings, but others were deeply unsettling. Close-ups of her sleeping, moments where she was adjusting her clothes, images that suggested an obsession. This discovery turned the case into something even more disturbing. If Reena had found out about these images, it could explain her rage. But was she furious at Rajiv, or was her jealousy directed solely at Anaya? Reena remained silent in custody, refusing to speak about the events of that night. Psychological evaluations suggested she was in a state of extreme emotional distress. When asked if she regretted what she had done, she only nodded. Public opinion was divided. Some saw Reena as a murderer who had let her jealousy destroy her daughter. Others believed she was a victim herself, a woman driven to madness by betrayal. Many questioned why Rajiv hadn't been arrested, despite the disturbing evidence against him. A deeper examination of Anaya's personal diary provided more heartbreaking insight. In one of her last entries she had written, "I miss my mother. She doesn't love me anymore. I don't even know what I did. I just want everything to go back to normal. I hate feeling like I'm the reason everything is falling apart." The case took another turn when forensic experts found something crucial. Anaya had defensive wounds, but there was no DNA evidence of Rajiv on her body. If he had been involved with her physically, there should have been something: hair, skin, fibers. Instead, the only DNA found under her fingernails belonged to her mother. This raised another terrifying possibility. Had Anaya truly been involved with Rajiv, or had Reena jumped to conclusions and acted on rage alone? Or worse, had Rajiv manipulated the entire situation, setting up both mother and daughter for destruction? The trial was set to begin in April 2025. Reena faced charges of murder, while Rajiv was under investigation for grooming a minor. However, with no concrete evidence linking him to a crime, it was uncertain whether he would ever face justice. As reporters swarmed the courtroom on the day of Reena's first hearing, One question echoed through the media: who was truly responsible for Anaya Sharma's death? And was justice even possible when the truth was still buried under layers of deception? Just when you think you've heard it all, the truth takes another turn. What would you have done if you were in their shoes? Keep watching, but don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. As the courtroom filled with reporters, lawyers, and curious onlookers, Reena Sharma sat in the defendant's chair, her face pale, her hands trembling. She had lost weight since her arrest, her once vibrant brown eyes now dull and hollow. The murder of her own daughter had not only destroyed her life, but had shaken the entire city of Mumbai. People whispered about the case in Mumbai, office corridors and school playgrounds, each person forming their own version of the truth. The prosecution wasted no time in painting Reena as a cold-blooded murderer. They laid out the evidence: the wooden rod stained with Anaya's blood, the bruises found on her arms and face, the neighbors who had heard the deadly fight. The prosecutor, a sharpened woman named Meera Kapoor, stood before the jury and laid out her case with precision. She described Reena as an abusive mother, one who had let her jealousy overtake her love for her daughter. She brought up Reena's past arguments with Anaya, the growing resentment between them, and the chilling way she had sat next to her daughter's lifeless body for hours before calling for help. The most damning piece of evidence was the lack of defensive wounds on Reena herself. If Anaya had fought back, why wasn't there a single scratch or bruise on Reena's body? The prosecution argued that Reena had overpowered Anaya completely, never giving her a chance to fight for her life, but the defense had their own story to tell. Reena's lawyer, Arun Malhotra, focused on Rajiv Sharma, the man at the center of it all. He pointed out the disturbing photos found on Rajiv's laptop, the secret messages exchanged with Anaya, and the testimony of Anaya's best friend, Priya. He argued that Reena had acted out of a mother's desperation, believing she was protecting her daughter from a predator living under their own roof. Then, Malhotra dropped a bombshell. Reena had made a confession, one that hadn't been released to the public. In a written statement, Reena claimed that on the night of the murder she had confronted Anaya about Rajiv. She had asked her daughter directly if something had been happening between them. According to Reena, Anaya had burst into tears and refused to answer. That silence, Reena wrote, had confirmed her worst fears. She had lost control. She had screamed, pushed Anaya, and hit her over and over until she stopped moving. But the defense argued that this was a mother's blind rage, not premeditated murder. Reena had been consumed by pain, believing her husband had stolen her daughter from her in the worst possible way. They pleaded for leniency, asking the jury to consider Reena's psychological state at the time. Yet, there were still unanswered questions. If Reena had truly believed Anaya had been seduced by Rajiv, why had she attacked only her daughter? Why hadn't she gone after Rajiv the moment he walked through the door? Why had she called him instead of calling the police? The answer to these questions, some believed, lay in Rajiv's actions. Though Rajiv had not been charged, the public viewed him as guilty. He had stopped appearing in court, avoiding reporters and cameras. His employer confirmed that he had resigned from his job just a week after the murder, and neighbors claimed they had seen him packing his bags. The media speculated that he was preparing to leave Mumbai, or then something unexpected happened. A new witness came forward, Rajiv's younger brother, Sanjay Sharma. Sanjay had been estranged from his brother for years, but after seeing the trial unfold, he reached out to the police with his own story. He claimed that Rajiv had a history of inappropriate behavior, particularly toward younger women. He described an incident from 5 years earlier, when Rajiv had been caught messaging a teenage girl in their neighborhood. Sanjay had confronted him, but Rajiv had laughed it off, saying, "It's just harmless fun." The girl's parents had been furious, but nothing had been done. This new revelation gave the prosecution more reason to investigate Rajiv. A formal complaint was filed, and police began reviewing his past interactions. It wasn't long before they found something else. A former housemaid who had worked for the Sharma family 2 years earlier told detectives that she had once seen Rajiv in Anaya's room late at night. She had found the situation suspicious, but Rajiv had told her to mind her own business. The maid had quit soon after. but the memory haunted her. With this new information, the case took a shocking turn. Reena's lawyer demanded that Rajiv be brought in for questioning. Investigators had no choice but to issue an official summons. But when officers arrived at his last known address, Rajiv was gone. His apartment was empty. His phone had been switched off. He had disappeared. The timing of his disappearance was damning. If he had nothing to hide, why had he fled? The public erupted with outrage. Social media exploded with hashtags demanding justice for Anaya. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Find Raji Sharma" and "Anaya deserves justice." The pressure on the police was immense. Every news channel in India covered the story, analyzing every detail. Some believed Rajiv had been planning his escape for months, while others speculated that he had help from someone powerful. Back in court, Reena remained silent. She refused to make eye contact with anyone. When the judge asked her if she had anything to say, she only shook her head. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On March 28, 2025, the verdict was announced. Reena Sharma was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison, a sentence lighter than what prosecutors had pushed for, but still severe enough to satisfy public demand. Some believed she had deserved life in prison, while others argued that she had already suffered enough. But the case wasn't over. The search for Rajiv Sharma continued. Police expanded their efforts, working with international agencies to track his whereabouts. His bank accounts were monitored, his relatives questioned, his online activity scrutinized, but he had left no trace. The only clue came from a CCTV camera near the Mumbai airport. A man resembling Rajiv had been seen boarding a flight to Dubai just days before his arrest warrant was issued. If it was him, he had managed to escape Indian authorities before they could bring him to justice. As the weeks passed, the outrage began to fade, replaced by a lingering unease. People knew Rajiv was out there, living freely, while Anaya was gone forever. The Sharma family was broken beyond repair. Reena's parents disowned her. Priya, Anaya's best friend, visited her grave regularly, leaving fresh flowers and whispering apologies for not realizing the danger sooner. The case left an unsettling question in the minds of many. Had justice truly been served, or had the real monster walked away untouched? The months after Reena Sharma's sentencing were filled with frustration, unanswered questions, and a relentless search for Rajiv Sharma. Though the trial had ended, the wounds it left behind remained open. The media refused to let the case fade, continuously airing updates, speculations, and desperate pleas from activists demanding Rajiv's arrest. Investigators traced his last known movements. His phone records showed a sudden call to an unknown number minutes before he went off the grid. Surveillance footage from Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj International Airport showed him walking calmly through security, wearing a dark hoodie and carrying only a single backpack. Authorities confirmed that a man matching his description had used a fake passport to board a flight to Dubai. But once he landed, his trail vanished. Indian authorities reached out to Interpol, placing Rajiv Sharma on their wanted list. A global alert was issued, his name flagged in immigration databases across multiple countries. Officials suspected he had powerful connections aiding his escape, but no one could prove it. Some believed he was hiding in the Middle East, while others were convinced he had changed his identity and disappeared into Europe. Despite the extensive manhunt, Rajiv remained a ghost. Meanwhile, inside Mumbai's Baikula Women's Jail, Reena struggled to adjust to life behind bars. She barely spoke, ate little, and spent most of her time staring at the walls of her cramped cell. Fellow inmates whispered about her, some pitying her, others despising her. To many, she was a mother who had lost control, blinded by rage and jealousy. But others saw her as a woman who had been betrayed by the two people she had trusted most, her husband and her own daughter. Letters from the public poured into the prison, some offering sympathy, others filled with hate. One message, scrawled in red ink, read, "You killed your own child. You don't deserve to live." Another letter, from a grieving mother who had lost her own daughter to abuse, told Reena she understood her pain. "I don't know if I would have done the same thing, but I know the kind of anger that burns inside a mother when she realizes her child has been taken from her. Rina never responded to any of them. Her own parents had refused to visit. They had cut all ties, ashamed and disgusted by what she had done. The few times she was allowed phone calls, she had no one to call. She was truly alone. But as the days turned into weeks, something changed. A new investigator, Anil Deshmukh, had taken over the search for Rajiv. Unlike his predecessors, he was determined to unravel the truth behind Rajiv's disappearance. He didn't believe a man like Rajiv could vanish without help, and his instincts told him to dig deeper into Rajiv's financial records. What he found shocked even the most seasoned officers. Rajiv had been transferring money into an offshore account for nearly a year before the murder. The transactions were small, carefully spread out to avoid suspicion, but together they amounted to nearly 10 million rupees. The timing was suspicious. Why would a man with a stable job, a good salary and a comfortable life be funneling money out of the country? Deshmukh suspected Rajiv had been planning to run long before the murder. Even more disturbing was what Deshmukh uncovered next. 2 years before Anaya's death, Rajiv had taken out a secret life insurance policy on his wife, worth 30 million rupees. The beneficiary? Himself. Deshmukh started to consider the possibility that Rajiv had never planned to stay with Rina at all. Was he preparing to leave her? Had he been planning something worse? Had Anaya simply become an obstacle in his larger scheme? The deeper Deshmukh looked, the more the story changed. One night, a private investigator working with Deshmukh got an anonymous tip from an overseas source. The voice on the other end of the line claimed that Rajiv had been seen in Bangkok. The caller said he had been using the name Rahul Singh and had been spotted in an upscale nightclub. It was the closest thing to a breakthrough the case had seen in months. Authorities worked with Thai police to track down the man known as Rahul Singh. They found his rented apartment and set up surveillance, waiting for him to return. Days passed, but there was no sign of him. Then, on the night of August 14, 2025, a body was pulled from the Chao Phraya River in Bangkok. A man dressed in expensive clothes was found with 2 gunshot wounds, one in the chest, one in the back of the head. His face was disfigured, but fingerprints confirmed the truth. Rajiv Sharma was dead. When news of his death reached India, reactions were mixed. Some saw it as justice finally catching up to him. Others felt cheated. He had escaped trial, never answering for what he had done. Police now had a new mystery to solve. Who had killed Rajiv Sharma? Speculation ran wild. Some believed he had got involved with the wrong people while on the run. Others thought he had betrayed the very people who helped him escape, and they had silenced him. A more chilling theory suggested that someone close to Anaya had arranged for his execution, a private act of revenge. Back in Mumbai, Rina Sharma received the news from her lawyer. For the first time in months, she spoke. "It's over," she whispered. But was it? The case had left scars that could never be erased. Anaya was gone. Rina would spend the next 15 years behind bars, alone. And the man who had started it all had died without ever facing justice. Some believed the story ended that day, but others knew the truth. There are crimes that shake a family, crimes that destroy a home. And then there are crimes that never truly end. This was one of them. A mother's rage, a stepfather's betrayal, a daughter caught in the crossfire. Justice was served, but was it enough? What do you think? Was this murder or an act of madness? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life crime stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew.